The USS Valor had served her country faithfully for decades, a steel giant cutting through enemy waters with silent defiance. But now, in the heart of a critical mission, she sat dead in the water. The engine room echoed with failure. Top. Engineers scrambled, manuals were pored over, systems rebooted, and still nothing. The ship was paralyzed, her future uncertain, her crew anxious. Lives and national security hung in the balance. That's when Admiral Prescott did something no one expected, something desperate, bold, and deeply personal. He made a phone call, not to another fleet, not to Washington, but to a man long forgotten by the Navy. An aging veteran who had once been mocked for his obsession with obsolete systems. A man who had sacrificed everything, even his career, to stand by his principles. He was a ghost to the modern Navy. Until this moment. This is not just a story about an engine. It's about legacy, sacrifice, and how the Navy's forgotten genius reminded the world that true brilliance doesn't retire. It endures. Stay with us for this emotional storytelling. Tribute to one of the Navy's unsung heroes, a real war hero whose final act of service changed everything. The USS Valor was a ship of legacy, a symbol of honor, resilience, and cutting-edge naval power. But on a stormy morning in the Pacific, she was rendered useless, adrift miles off the coast of Okinawa. What began as a routine patrol had turned into a logistical nightmare. The heart of the vessel, its engine system, had failed without warning. Inside the dim engine room, fluorescent lights flickered over sweat-drenched uniforms. A dozen engineers, top graduates from the Naval Academy, barked technical codes and diagnostics into headsets. Digital displays showed anomalies they couldn't explain. The ship's propulsion system was of a complex hybrid design based on both new AI-assisted tech and vintage Navy engineering blueprints. The very combination that once made her a marvel was now her curse. Try restart protocol Delta 7 again, barked Lieutenant Ramirez, slamming a fist onto the control panel. All ready. Did it twice, sir, came the voice of Chief Engineer Collins. Still no power. The engine's completely unresponsive. It's like it doesn't recognize itself. Above deck, the Admiral stood in silence. Rear Admiral John Prescott was not a man easily rattled. Decorated, seasoned, and calm under pressure, he had survived torpedo fire, cyber warfare, and political fallout. But this was different. He knew what was at stake. The Valor was carrying sensitive intelligence equipment bound for a joint Allied operation in the South China Sea. If they didn't make the rendezvous in 36 hours, the mission would be scrubbed and potentially compromised. Worse, if hostile forces intercepted the immobile ship, it would be a national disaster. Communications were kept discreet. Publicly, the Valor was undergoing routine maintenance. But inside the Admiral's private cabin, the weight of the truth pressed hard. We've called every expert in the Pacific Fleet. We've done remote diagnostics from D.C., said Commander Liu, head of technical logistics. Nothing's working. No one understands this hybrid core like the man who designed it. Prescott's eyes narrowed. I know who designed it, he said quietly. He was once the Navy's brightest mind in propulsion systems. But they called him too stubborn, too traditional. Said he didn't play well with newer command protocols. You mean Commander Jacob Ellis? Lee's eyes widened. He retired 10 years ago. More like pushed out, Prescott sighed bitterly. They stripped his clearance. Made him a scapegoat when one of the prototype engines overheated during trials. But everything working in that engine room today came from his hands. There was silence. He won't answer. Liu said, after what the Navy did to him, he will, Prescott interrupted, reaching for the old landline radio in his desk. Because he's a sailor, and sailors don't turn their back on a ship in distress. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, in a small coastal town in Oregon, Jacob Ellis sat alone in a dusty garage that smelled of engine oil and forgotten years. A rusted Navy clock ticked above his workbench. His fingers, now weathered and calloused, gently worked on a small model. Turbine, a hobby he never gave up. He hadn't worn his uniform in a decade. Not since the day he walked out of the Pentagon with his honor bruised and his contributions erased. The Navy never apologized. Never looked back. Until now. The radio buzzed on his shelf. A signal code, one only he would recognize. Jacob froze. Hadn't heard that tone in years. He walked to it slowly, as if afraid it might vanish. Static. Then a familiar voice. Jacob, it's Prescott. The Valor needs you. I wouldn't ask. Unless it was life or death. There was a long pause. Jacob stared at the radio. The weight of silence between them was thick. Years of betrayal, of sleepless nights and broken loyalty. Then, quietly, he replied, "Send me the blueprints. I'll be there by nightfall." Back on the USS Valor, disbelief turned into hope. The engineers were skeptical. Who was this old man Prescott had summoned? A retired commander shunned by the very institution they now represented? Some didn't even know his name, but Prescott knew, and he was betting everything: the ship, the mission, and his own reputation on a forgotten hero, because sometimes the answers don't lie in algorithms or AI. Sometimes they live in the hands of someone the world chose to forget. The helicopters touched down just before midnight. The Valor's deck crew stood in formation, unsure of what to expect. Rain tapped steadily on the metal hull, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Then, through the mist and noise, a figure stepped out, slow, upright, deliberate. Commander Jacob Ellis. He wore no uniform. Just a dark coat, military boots, and the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove. His silver hair was tucked under a navy cap, and his eyes, sharp, observant, scanned the vessel not as a visitor, but like someone returning. Home. Silence followed his first few steps onto the ship. Some crew members had only heard rumors about Ellis. Others recognized him from old training manuals. Diagrams signed CMDR Ellis in the corners of engineering schematics. No longer taught in the academy. A few junior officers whispered under their breath, "Is that the guy who got discharged after the engine fire?" Thought he was dead. But Admiral Prescott stood tall at the edge of the deck, hands behind his back, waiting. When Ellis reached him, the two men exchanged no salute. Just a firm handshake, and a shared glance of old pain, buried trust, and unfinished business. "Thank you for coming," Prescott said. "I didn't come for you," Ellis replied softly. "I came for her." He looked past the Admiral toward the ship's hull, toward the engine room below, where his creation lay crippled. Down in the engine bay, Ellis moved like a man among ghosts. Every pipe, every bolt, every circuit felt like a memory. His hands brushed along a bulkhead he once personally redesigned to withstand overheating under prolonged torque loads. Now it was covered in dust and careless rewiring. The current engineering team watched in awkward silence. Lieutenant Ramirez stepped forward, arms crossed. "Sir, with all due respect, we've already run over 60 diagnostics. The system's fried." Ellis didn't even look at him. He walked to the core control panel and flipped a switch with muscle memory alone. The screen blinked. "You've been testing it like a modern AI system. This engine was built with analog redundancies for battlefield reliability. It needs manual override engagement first." "We tried that already." "You tried the new protocol," Ellis interrupted. "You didn't try mine." Ramirez sighed and stepped back. Ellis continued his inspection. As he did, memories stirred, flashes of test days. Long nights drawing designs in grease-stained notebooks, battles over funding. The day they accused him of designing a faulty coolant flow, and the boardroom where no one listened as he tried to explain what they got wrong. Back then, they replaced him with software engineers. Now, they had no choice but to watch the man they once dismissed breathe life into the machine. They couldn't understand that hours passed. The engine room became a silent stage. Ellis moved like a conductor, calling for tools, checking valves, listening not just to the data, but to the rhythm of the metal itself. He touched the side of the turbine, feeling the vibrations with his fingers. "This engine isn't dead," he said finally. "It's confused." "Confused?" someone asked, puzzled. "She's receiving contradictory instructions from hybrid systems that were never properly integrated. The AI is overriding failsafes I built in. It's trying to run in two languages at once, like asking a veteran and a recruit to march in opposite directions." It wasn't just a poetic explanation. It was dead on. The control team checked the readings again. For the first time in 2 days, there was clarity. Ellis's theory made sense, but Ramirez wasn't convinced. Even if that's true, how do you bypass the AI block without disabling the ship's security network? "You don't bypass it," Ellis replied, walking to a hidden panel in the wall. He pressed 3 small points in sequence, an old override system almost no one knew existed. "You talk to it like an engineer, not like a programmer." He flipped the final switch. The lights flickered, then glowed steady blue. A hum began to grow in the belly of the ship, soft at first, then louder, stronger, like the heartbeat of a giant awakening from sleep. The Valor stirred. Gasps echoed across the room. Engineers stared at the readouts in disbelief. Core pressure rising, coolant stabilizing. RPMs climbing. "She's alive," whispered Collins, eyes wide, back on deck. Admiral Prescott watched the ship systems return to life one by one. A quiet pride filled his chest, but also guilt. He had allowed the Navy to forget Jacob Ellis had stood by as politics erased the legacy of one of their finest minds. He walked to the engine room in silence. There, standing alone as the turbines roared back to life, was Ellis, a man now surrounded by those who had once doubted him, and now looked at him with something far deeper than respect. Reverence. "You saved her," Prescott said softly. "No," Ellis replied, not looking up. "She just needed someone to remember how she was built." Later that night, Ellis sat alone in the mess hall. The crew had offered to celebrate, but he declined. He wasn't looking for applause. His hands were still stained with grease, and his thoughts still trapped in the hum of the engine. A young sailor approached quietly. "Sir," she said nervously, "I studied your original designs in training. They told us they were outdated. But today, I watched them save a warship. I just wanted to say thank you." Ellis nodded, a soft smile breaking across his tired face. "Take care of her. She's more than metal. She's memory." In that moment, the Valor wasn't just a warship. She was a living tribute to forgotten heroes. And Jacob Ellis, once cast aside, had reminded everyone what true brilliance looked like. Not flashy, not loud, just quietly, stubbornly. Right. The Valor was alive again. Her engines hummed steadily beneath the waves. Her navigation systems recalibrated, her crew busy preparing for departure. Word spread quickly throughout the Pacific Fleet. The mission was back on. But below deck, deep inside the warship that once carried his legacy, Jacob Ellis wasn't celebrating. He sat quietly in a shadowed corridor near the old manual pressure gauges, instruments he had personally installed back when most officers didn't understand why a digital ship needed analog backups, because, he had once said, when everything else fails, a human hand should still know what to do. That philosophy had made him a legend, and then a liability. Admiral Prescott found him there, sitting with his back against the wall like a man half anchored in memory. "You never liked command rooms," the Admiral said softly. Jacob gave a half smile. "Too many screens. Not enough truth." There was a long silence between them. Prescott finally sat down beside him, not as an admiral, but as an old friend who had betrayed that friendship. "You should have never been forced out," Prescott said. "You warned them about the overheating issue during the prototype phase. But politics needed a name to blame." Jacob looked straight ahead, his voice steady. "I didn't need medals. I didn't need headlines. I just wanted to serve. And when the fire happened, they needed someone to fall. I was the easiest target." Prescott's jaw tightened. "I should have fought harder for you." "No," Jacob said, shaking his head slowly. "You did what commanders do. You protected the fleet. You protected the mission. You just forgot to protect the man behind the machine." That line hit hard, not out of bitterness, but honesty. The kind that doesn't demand sympathy, just remembrance. Meanwhile, above deck, younger officers debated what had just unfolded. How does someone like that get erased from the Navy's history? Because sometimes the loudest voices win, even when they're wrong. He saved the Valor, and they practically exiled him. But it wasn't just about an engine anymore. It was about what Ellis represented, the cost of integrity, the sacrifice of being right too soon, the burden of standing your ground in a world that punishes silence less than courage. Ellis hadn't just fixed a ship. He'd reopened a wound the Navy hadn't wanted to admit it caused. Back in the Admiral's cabin, Prescott poured 2 cups of coffee, just like old times. "Do you remember that night off the Horn of Africa?" he asked. "When we lost steering for 6 hours?" Jacob nodded. "You ordered a hard stop. Everyone panicked. But you waited." "I waited because you said the rudder chain was jammed and not broken. You believed me." "I did." "You were right then, too." Prescott took a sip, then added quietly, "You've always been right, Jacob, and I let the system bury you for it." Ellis stared at the steam rising from the cup. "It wasn't about being right. It was about keeping men alive." His voice cracked slightly, but he covered it with a breath. "You know what hurt most?" he continued. "It wasn't losing my clearance. It wasn't getting pushed into retirement. It was hearing that my designs were removed from training manuals, like I never existed." Prescott set his cup down gently. "That changes today." Hours later, an announcement echoed across the ship. "All personnel to the main deck for a formal address." The crew assembled, still unsure of what to expect. Admiral Prescott stood at the front, metals gleaming under floodlights, the Pacific wind tugging at his coat. And beside him stood Jacob Ellis, not in uniform, not in command, but finally in recognition. The Admiral stepped forward. "Today the Valor sails again because of a man the Navy chose to forget. A man whose sacrifice was never officially acknowledged. But let it be known now, publicly, permanently, that Commander Jacob Ellis is not just the mind behind this ship. He is the reason she still serves." There was silence. Then, as if the ship herself had taken a breath, the entire crew stood at attention. And one by one, they saluted. Not because they had to, but because they understood. Because emotional storytelling is not just about victories. It's about truth being restored. As the ship moved steadily toward her mission, Jacob stood at the stern, staring into the sea, where foam trailed behind them like chalk on a blackboard, erasing nothing, but writing something new. "Feels different being back?" the Admiral asked. Jacob nodded. "It feels like peace. Not justice, just peace. And in the Navy, that's sometimes the highest honor a man can hope for." The sun began to rise over the Pacific, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and gold. The USS Valor sliced confidently through the waves, engines strong, systems synchronized, restored by the very hands that had once brought her to life. But Jacob Ellis knew his time aboard was coming to an end. He wasn't there for the mission. He wasn't there for glory. He had answered the call because that's what real war heroes do, even when the world forgets their name. He served because it was right, not because it was remembered. Later that morning, a quiet ceremony took place in the Admiral's private wardroom. It wasn't grand. There were no cameras, no medals. Just Admiral Prescott, a few senior officers, and Jacob standing before the original engine schematics he'd once drawn in the margins of classified briefings. Time had yellowed the paper, but the lines were still precise, still brilliant. Prescott placed a small velvet box on the table and opened it. Inside was a restored Navy Commendation Medal, reissued under his direct authority, for battlefield courage in the line of service, for protecting the mission even after the uniform was taken away. Prescott said. Jacob looked down at it, and for a moment emotion flickered across his weathered face. "They finally gave it back," he whispered. "No," Prescott replied. "We finally gave it to the right man." Hours later, as the mission carried on and the Valor rejoined her fleet, Jacob stood once more on the landing pad, this time preparing to leave. The Admiral walked beside him, offering a final handshake. But Jacob instead offered a salute, not to the rank, but to the institution he had never stopped believing in. "I may have left the Navy, John," he said, "but it never left me." Prescott's voice cracked as he replied, "We were wrong to forget you. You were the compass we needed all along." As the helicopter blades began to whirl, several sailors ran onto the deck, young men and women who had once doubted him, stood in a line and saluted, not out of duty, but from the heart, a military tribute for a man whose name would never again be missing from the Navy's story. Back in Oregon, weeks later, Jacob returned to his small coastal home. On the mantel, beside old photographs of ships and faded newspaper clippings, now stood the medal he had once believed lost forever. He didn't need it to feel proud, but it meant something, not just to him, but to every forgotten hero who had ever been cast aside when the spotlight faded. Months passed. The Navy quietly restored Ellis's records. His original training manuals were reinstated. And at the Naval Engineering Academy in Annapolis, a lecture hall was renamed the Commander Jacob Ellis Hall of Systems Integrity. Inside, a plaque reads, "For the unsung heroes whose minds shaped ships and whose hearts shaped honor." The final shot fades back to the ocean, endless, silent, loyal. And in the distance, the Valor sails onward. Not just as a warship, but as a symbol of remembrance. Of sacrifice, of a man who was right and patient enough to wait for the world to finally see it. Because sometimes the most powerful stories don't come from the battlefield, but from the ones who were brave enough to never walk away.